Okay, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia from Celestial Astrology, and we're going to be looking at the weekly Astro update for the 20th to the 27th of November today. And I'm very lucky to be joined by my very good friend Shawna from smartastro.com. Shawna, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, I'm Shawna. Thank you for having me again, Sonia. I am available for natal readings. Just gab about astrology if you want to. You can find me at smartastro.com. Smartastro is the handle on all the socials, so you can find me there too. Yeah, let's take a look at this week.
Great. Okay, so we're looking at the 20th to the 27th, and we start here with on the 21st, the Sun will enter Sagittarius, the lovely sign of Jupiter. Kind of like the last sign before we get to the full winter solstice sign, I feel. And then we get the first aspect with the new Aquarian Pluto, which is a sextile from the Sun. And that just feels quite nice to me. A sextile is a nice Venusian energy aspect, a nice gentle easing in to our themes. On the 22nd, we've got Venus sextiling Saturn. And on the 26th, Mercury will station retrograde in Sagittarius. We've got two Sagittarius things. The Sun will enter and Mercury will station retrograde a few days after. And then on the 27th, to close out the month, we've got the Sun trining Mars. And so I've broken the week down. The aspects we're going to look at, the Sun entering Sagittarius, and we're also going to look at the Sun sextiling Pluto, because that's important as that first aspect that Pluto's making on the 22nd, the following day. So we will notice that in the charts. We'll see this Venus sextiling Saturn. And then we'll look at Mercury stationary retrograde. And while we're looking at that, we'll take a little peek at the Sun trining Mars as well, which happens on the following day. So as Mercury stationing retrograde in the sign of Sagittarius, the Sun, who's also in Sagittarius, is moving to trine that Mars that's about to turn retrograde. So it's kind of bringing this retrograde energy, I feel, into the conversation. Like towards the end of this week, we're really going to be feeling that slowing down as they prepare, and the Sun may be giving us that first or last introduction to the Mars in Leo themes before Mars retrogrades as well. What do you think, Shawna, of what we've got this week?
Yeah, we've got some big Sag themes going, which brings Jupiter into the conversation, which brings out more big.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be exciting to see what Pluto has to do in Aquarius now.
Yeah, I sense that's going to be our first introduction, maybe. So going on to our first chart. So we've got the Sun here on the 21st of November. The Sun enters Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is a sign of fire. It's yang, which is masculine, although we don't mean gender. When we say masculine, we mean the way that it operates and the way that we experience it is more outgoing, out in the world, in our actions, in events that may happen to us, rather than things that are experienced internally in our minds and thoughts and changes of perspective. But Sagittarius is also mutable or double-bodied, which means that there's two sides here, two sides going on. And before we started, Shawna was just explaining to me about how a Gemini brain can work sometimes. And we were saying about sometimes you have to lean into that's how it's supposed to be, that there's supposed to be this duality or this dual nature of it. So don't fight that if that's something that comes up for you. If you experience, the Sun's moving from this intense sign of Scorpio that's very fixed, and then suddenly there's this burst of fire. Like Sagittarius just feels like the most energetic of the fire signs to me. Jupiter's so optimism is like the overused word, but also the expansiveness of Jupiter, but also the hope and the wisdom that Jupiter brings. And Jupiter wants to bring order to things, but does it in a different way to Venus, bringing people together. Venus will bring people and things together, and Jupiter also will, but it will create order and kind of like lasting, meaningful structures that bring us like that higher wisdom, higher thought. He's kind of going to support all of that philosophical thinking and everything in the things that he's bringing together and the things that Jupiter wants to do here. So while the Sun and Mercury are traveling through Jupiter's temple, we might see some change in the collective in terms of wanting to create those things, bringing those higher principles in, rather than the self-examination in Scorpio, looking at the darker side of things. It's now, right, what are we going to do about it? What could we create? How could we resolve this? And how can we bring the resources that we have together to support it? So I kind of like this, to see the Sun and Mercury there with Sun's ingress as well. And the Sun doesn't have like the essential dignity of being at home or in its domicile, but it is the triplicity ruler. So we've got the triplicity ruler here is showing us Jupiter because it is a night chart that we're looking at, but the Sun is the day triplicity ruler. So it's comfortable here. And triplicities show where the support comes from. So it's kind of like there is support from Jupiter, that the Sun is opposite. And we discussed last week about Mercury and Jupiter being in a mutual reception as well, both in exile. So both having to struggle against something, but also both supporting each other. And then here comes the Sun being supported by Jupiter as well, even though it's got that opposition polarity of where they are. But at least it's got sight of its ruler, which is great. But there might be some tension. Oppositions are of the nature of Saturn. So there can be some hard lessons, obstacles, boundaries that come into that conversation as well for that support to be able to manifest. And also, as I was saying in the introduction, it's the last mutable third of the autumn season. So we're seeing, obviously, the leaves have been turning, and it's kind of like that turning of the wheel of the year as well. When we get to Capricorn, we come towards the winter solstice, like the deepest part of winter, the shortest day as well, and the most darkness. So here it's that last mutable, changeable side as we prepare for that coldness, of the deepest, darkest winter. So that's something to remember as well before the 21st. It's like that Greek god Dionysus. I know they had like some days, didn't they, before Yule that were outside of the calendar, and it was like, let's party for tomorrow we die. That kind of energy of this is party at the end of the millennium. This is, the party to end all parties, when Jupiter and the Sun get together and live it up, kick up their heels, and they know that that's what we're here for, to party and enjoy life. And that's what we do, because in Capricorn things get serious. So for now, just enjoy this hope, optimism. We can still get out and have lovely autumn walks, and that's really quite nice to see all the colours on the trees and the leaves and everything. Enjoy it. There are whole sign trines to Mars and the Moon in Leo. So both of them, Mars is still direct, but once we get, my arrow's not behaving again, once we get to December, Mars will be reaching that 6-degree point where it turns retrograde. And we've got the Moon there in Leo as well. So that's the Sun's sign. So it's nice that the Sun has this trine aspect to its own sign. It can help Mars in whatever Mars wants to do. It's in charge of Mars and the Moon at the time of its ingress. So that's a nice supportive aspect, that the Sun's lending help there to Mars in what it needs to do before we look at that Mars retrograde. I know some people are worried about it. Well, I was in a class last night and there was a lot of questions about the Mars retrograde. And I would say that, we live through these every 2 years. Mars's cycle is a 2-year cycle. So if you're kind of new to astrology and this is the first time you've worried about a Mars retrograde, please don't, because it's like you've lived through these every 2 years of your life. So you've got, as we live and grow, we get more experience in handling this energy as well, more tools in our toolkit. So the effects can lessen in that respect, because we're bringing our own experience and our knowledge of dealing with it to the table as well. And also it depends on whether Mars is your malefic obsect as well. So for night charts, Mars is insect, so it tends to be beneficial. So if you've got a night chart, this is even less worrying. It's likely to be helpful, whatever happens. And if you've got a day chart, yeah, there's more of a possibility of difficult Martian things happening, but also quite often they're quite mundane that people experience when it actually comes to it. And usually it's something that you need to look at and you need to review. And if you're doing that work anyway, you're already there. Anyway, I didn't mean to go too deep talking about the Mars retrograde, but
No, that's great.
It's like the Sun trining it just is a nice final goodbye before we reach that retrograde season, because we have been talking about it for most of the year. And the Sun's also got a square to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. That means it's a whole sign square. So as the Sun ingresses Sagittarius, it's going to be in that square with Saturn and Neptune for the whole time it's moving through Sagittarius, which is usually a month. It usually goes in on the 21st, 22nd of the month, and then 21st, 22nd, it will enter Capricorn. So for that month, it will be in that square. But once it reaches 12 degrees, after that, it will be what we call flowing forth from Saturn. So it's more intense when it's applying. So it's only for that first 10 days or so that is at the most intense of that square to Saturn. And then the last 2/3 of the month would be more full of ease and a bit of an easier square to Neptune, I would imagine. How are you seeing this, Shawna?
No, I like that you brought up the Mars retrograde. I think it's a great reminder that we go through it every couple of years, and it's not going to end us. It doesn't happen as often as the Mercury retrograde, but so we kind of get used to the ebb and flow of that. But the Mars retrograde's not going to end us. It's just going to be bumps in the road. Not a big deal. You'll get through it. Yeah,
sometimes when we talk about something so much, the astro anxiety can build, and then people who are hearing it who don't fully maybe understand everything about it can
100%.
There's something worrying coming. But yeah, I mean, it's a big deal in the astro community because it's only every 2 years. So the more rare something is, the more we maybe talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, all of the planets have a retrograde cycle. It's just that the outers are usually, in a retrograde cycle every 6 months. They go forward, they go backward in about 6 month periods. So we're not really feeling those the same way that we do with some of those closer planets. But, a Venus retrograde and a Mars retrograde, it's not as often as a Mercury. So we always hear about Mercury going retrograde because it's like 3 times a year. So we deal with these cycles where we get these little hiccups in communication and, all the usual things, all the rewords. But with Mars and Venus, it's every couple of years. And so we like to take note of things that happen a little less frequently. And in that, to avoid that astro anxiety, if you pay attention to what's going on, then you know how to plan for what the possibilities are in the future. So that's all I hope to bring attention to. And I think it's probably the same for you too. But yeah, as far as the sun moving into Sagittarius, we're going from fixed water now to a double-bodied fire. There's bound to be some steam in between there. Maybe you feel like you started the engine on the car, kind of a thing. You've made your plans while you were sitting in fixed water, and now you're actually activating those plans and moving through those plans now that the sun's moved into Sag. And Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter, you think of the centaur, you think of that exertion, that activity, that movement. Like you said, the wisdom and the optimism are definitely longstanding keywords for that. So finding those things in the everyday little activities and things that you do is really important. You could find maybe a little bit of going from the fixed water now into the fire sign and being mutable or double-bodied. There could be a little bit of a restlessness too, depending on where that falls for you. And you might find yourself becoming a little more philosophical, things like that.
Yeah. So we should say, shouldn't we, who will feel it? It will be most likely the mutable signs, although the fixed signs will feel that change. It'll be the mutable signs that feel it. So Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo. And feel just the benefit of the sun shining. It's like a lighting up of whatever you're doing and whatever is going on in those houses for you. It's like the sun illuminates everything and gives the energy to grow. So it's bringing that energy to grow for you, and particularly when it's in Jupiter's temple. Both of them are life-giving planets, aiming to help nurture and grow. And what you really want to do is just make sure you know what it is you want to grow and work on that, and not that it's things that you don't want to grow. There are things in life we don't want our waistbands to expand, for example. So beware of maybe overeating, especially as we're coming into the holiday season and everything. Maybe that's why it is a Sagittarian time. It's all those Christmas parties and Thanksgiving parties and everything coming up, and there's plenty of food. So maybe have a plan for that, especially if it's prominent in your chart. That's one way that it could manifest, maybe.
Yeah, indulgence is a great word for Jupiter too, isn't it? Between Venus and Jupiter, excess, indulgence, expansion, like you said, the waistline, that could happen. We're coming into all those end of year celebrations. Feels like everyone's making those plans while we're still in that fixed water, and then executing those plans once that sun moves signs.
I sometimes like to think, okay, I'm going to ask Jupiter to grow this, and really focus on the things that I want to grow in my life.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
That's a good way to to navigate through that.
All right. So now it is November 21st. We are looking at the Sun in Sagittarius in a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius. Sextiles are of the nature of Venus, so there usually is an ease about it. And Venus likes harmony, so hopefully this means things are a little more cohesive. The Sun representing life and plotline and vitality, among other things, with an aspect to Pluto being transformation and, to use your word, empowerment, or the potential for empowerment. It feels like it could get very tense, but there's some solace there in that sextile because it is an easier, slower going, nice, free flowing sort of aspect. We talked about the Sun in Sagittarius and what kinds of things you can expect to go along with that. And we talked about Pluto and Aquarius last week, I think, and we covered a lot. I feel like that's been a topic of conversation for everyone, but I feel like with this kind of an aspect, we can have maybe some revelations of truth, like truth as power, since it is actually Pluto and bringing in that powerful empowerment, transformative, kind of a word. Maybe some things are going to be uncovered that can maybe propel us in a positive direction. I think that's definitely an opportunity with this aspect. Maybe some of that adventurous optimism. We talked about optimism a bit ago, with the Sun moving into Sagittarius. Maybe that Pluto is going to have some influence there. And maybe instead of doing what people always expect of you, you try something new and something different. And that works out better than you're expecting. There could also be some things, debates about freedom. We touched on the recent election and how things have been going with that. And there's been a lot of conversation about recounts and what's fair and what's not fair and ethics. And I think those can definitely be some themes that continue to come up, particularly during this aspect. And Pluto is very, very slow moving. We know that. We talked about that before. The Sun moves about a degree a day. So it's going to be in aspect for some time, whole sign in particular, but degree-based aspect, it'll last a few days, if not the full week. You'll feel the impacts of it. And of course, it's going to be long-term. So the things that come up, the earth that gets churned through this is likely to be long-lasting effects. This isn't always a bad thing. This can be really, really great. It can be moving things forward. Aquarius has that whole theme of the collective for some people. So keeping that in mind, this can definitely be a nice, positive, enlightening kind of a shift. Along with the Sun, you can sometimes get some inspiration. I think we talked about that. Maybe there's some different kind of charisma that you aren't accustomed to. Maybe someone is a little more charming that you wouldn't expect to be, or maybe even some infatuation. That doesn't necessarily mean with a person. It could be maybe it's a subject you want to study or something you're interested in. Sag can bring a lot of themes around learning or teaching.
I really like that because, I was reflecting on how they're both yang signs with the Pluto Sun, where it's been in Capricorn before. It's been an internal thing for many of us because that was a yin energy and feminine, which is more receptive. So in the way that we personally experience it, whereas now these aspects that it's making are more external, where we talked about the difference between the yang and the yin. So how that might manifest, like things that you reviewed of your Pluto and Capricorn journey now being shown, okay, you're now in your Pluto and Aquarius journey. It's time to start taking action on these things. And we're being shown maybe where the action needs to be taken, but it's very gentle, this sextile from Venus. It's a Venusian nature. It's not a square that's demanding or an opposition that's demanding you must take action and really pushing you over that edge to do it. It's something that's saying, oh, you might want to think about this. The good news is if we tune in when we get those little thoughts in our head, we might want to think about this. Watch for them because they're your little prompts and they're what's going to make the squares and the oppositions so much easier as the Sun moves around and as the other planets move around. If we're tuned into, okay, what is our Pluto and Aquarius story? Of course, we can't know what the next 20 years of our story is going to be, but if we tune into what's coming up, particularly in this time with this aspect, it's kind of like that little intro, like you go to the theatre and there's a little thing that tells you a little bit about what you're going to see. It's not the full story, but it's like a nice gentle introduction and what you might want to think about, what you might be looking forward to. Is it Act 2 or Act 3, or is your favourite actor there, or is somebody else playing it tonight? kind of thing. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it working out, because the sun is like us, our purpose, our spirit, and our drive in life. And then it's showing this light on Pluto, which can be the shadow side of things, the more difficult things. But it, as Shawna said, ultimately empowerment. That's where it's moving us towards. So the things that it's telling us we might want to think about, the things that are ultimately going to make things better for us, even if it's not a critical problem right now. Still tune into it, still take note, and still think you might start doing something about it. You know, I've heard in Pluto stories, people say, actually, I had that voice in my head telling me before I took the action. I think this is the point where that voice starts speaking to you on what you might want to do. And I think it's nice they've both got that aspect to Jupiter, although Pluto's like got the trine to Jupiter. So the whole time Jupiter's in Gemini, we've got that trine. So that's kind of nice. While the sun's in Jupiter's temple, that's kind of like another testimony that this is supportive and easy, a little bit more helpful. The other thing was that they neither of them can see Venus. And Pluto can't see Saturn, who's the ruler of Aquarius. So there's a little bit of them both being a bit in the dark. I sense there's like this aversion. And my advice to people with aversions is always listen to the people around you. Because sometimes the voice doesn't come from you. It comes from, actually, this is the third person today who's told me this, you know, or the third bit of feedback I've had saying the same thing. And again, that's the kind of thing we want to be tuning into right now, that the voice isn't directly coming to us. It's coming in a circuitous way. Is that the right way to say it? With both of these planets not being able to see their ruler directly. We got the moon, like the two lights. The moon's in the sun sign. So again, it's giving its blessing and giving that supportive trine. The moon being our emotions and our feelings, just saying that, okay, our emotions are along for the ride on this. I've had some archetypes when these two meet. Sometimes it can be like the Jekyll and Hyde, a death and rebirth is the Pluto saying, but also Orpheus and the Sandman, a more recent Orpheus in chaos, sort of being willing to go back down into the underworld to retrieve his lost love, and the Sandman, and that kind of drive, but willingness to face the underworld. Pluto is the lord of the underworld. So there is, I mean, this isn't particularly dark because the sun's illuminating it, but there is that element of something coming up that's usually hidden to us. And I always think that's a really good time to be aware. That's when astrology really helps us to be aware that actually if something we're not usually aware of is being shown, like I say, that feedback that you maybe don't normally hear or is slightly uncomfortable to hear. You know, it's something you don't like about yourself maybe that you're hearing, but we're meant to hear it right now. So it is time. And if we do this work now, we're going to save ourselves a lot of, you know, heartache and struggle as we move on. I think we'll have to see. I haven't been an astrologer long enough for a whole Pluto transit through one sign to be sure of this, but that's my theory anyway. And that's what I've seen play out in my own life and what I've heard from other people as well. But I'll tell you in 20 years if that's how it actually worked or not.
You know, that's a really interesting thing that you just said, because I'm noticing too that we've just had a Moon-Pluto opposition. Moon would have been just about conjoining Mars too, just before. So you're totally dead on. I think that it might be something that stings at first, you know, but it's something that's constructive that you can use and you can turn the jewel, right? You polish the pearl and you find the beauty underneath the mud. Just given that the moon moves so fast that it's going to have that opposition, and it has a conjunction with Mars every month. But it's just interesting that it happens to be just after Pluto has ingressed into Aquarius, right as the sun is ingressing into Sag, and we have the luminaries there in a solid trine. So yeah, it might be something that stings a little. Once you mull it over a little bit, you can use it and bring it back better.
Yeah, and we always think of the moon as that trigger, don't we? As the moon moves around, like all of these aspects aren't active all of the time, but yeah, they come into play and out. And quite often it is the moon that is the final, okay, we're good to go. It's like the firing gun at the starting line. The athletes are ready, they're primed, they've done years of training. There's a lot that goes into it. And then there's that starting gun, go. And that quite often is the moon that has the final say on that, because it's the moon translates the planets and brings it down to Earth for us. So the moon is likely to be carrying the Mars-Pluto opposition is kind of what we would say flowing forth now. It's just slightly out of a degree base range, but we know that it's going to be coming back in December as Mars retrogrades. We'll go back over that area. But with the moon traveling through that as well, it's more likely to remind us, okay, yeah, that happened as well. Go do something about it with an opposition. And even with that, there's still no sight of Saturn there, although there is that nice trine to the sun. Saturn is the ruler of Pluto. The sun obviously is the ruler of the moon and Mars. Is the reason why I was saying that. And then we know that on the next day, so we can just see it forming right now, is the Venus and Saturn sextile. So it's like all sextiles, it's all Venus. Sextiles are the nature of Venus. So because we've got those sextiles, we've got the Venusian nature coming through. So she's having that interaction with Saturn, who's the ruler of Pluto. So it does all tie back in that. But again, Venus is bringing something very nice, but also pragmatic in earthy Capricorn. There's something that wants to get built, that wants to be created, something ambitious. Maybe that Venus is just beautifying and adding some harmony to, maybe bringing the right people together for it. And then that sextile to Saturn gives you the opportunity to really get going with whatever needs to be built there, I feel. Sometimes it can be about relationships because it's Venus, but also when you're looking at Pisces and Capricorn, Capricorn is, I call it like the world builder, like the ambitious side of the zodiac. Capricorn's very focused on what it's creating. And I think Austin Coppock calls it the big desk, in offices. And it's who's sitting at the biggest desk. And that'll be the corner office with lots of glass and the biggest desk. But also the buck stops there. There's no one else higher up to blame. So that's Capricorn. And then in Pisces, it's a completely different vibe. It's kind of endless and ethereal and flowing. But Saturn's there wanting to create something. And Venus is the triplicity ruler there. So there's an affinity as these two meet in their Venusian sextile. Saturn's in the sign of Venus's exaltation. So we'd call that a mixed reception. Venus is in Saturn's temple and Saturn's in the sign of Venus's rulership. So there's something that they're working together, collaborating on very, very nicely to create for you. And this is kind of closing out the Venus-Saturn synodic cycle as well, that would have started in Pisces as Venus has moved around. Her cycle's usually just over a year, just slightly over, because she moves ahead and behind the sun, depending on whether she's forward or retrograde. But it means that she's now coming in Aquarius. She won't be able to see Saturn, and then her next aspect will be to join Saturn in a conjunction, which will start a whole new thing. So this is, again, Venus doing the final touches on whatever the two are building in that whole cycle. Since they met, I think it was the beginning of the year, we had a lot of planets all pile up and travel through, didn't we, all at once? Meeting Pluto and then meeting Saturn, which was quite a big deal.
This kind of mixed reception that Venus and Saturn have, it's really just kind of putting a nice bow on things. I mean, that's just how it feels to me. Saturn stationing direct, Venus is still an applying aspect. So there's still a bit more to come with these two, which is really nice. It makes it a little tougher that Saturn can't really see what's going on with Pluto at the moment, but Pluto's just getting settled. So I'm not concerned about that at this point. It's brand new. It's just shaking off the dirt from Capricorn, and now just gonna breathe some fresh air in Aquarius, stretch its legs a little bit, and kind of get moving.
So on the 26th, we've got Mercury stationing retrograde at 22 degrees of Sagittarius. And at the same time, on the following day, the sun is moving into a trine with Mars. And we'll speak about that briefly at the end as it's applying, which is usually when it's most intense. But we'll look first at the Mercury station in Sagittarius. And as we've spoken about already, when we've spoken about the sun, Sagittarius is fire, yang, and mutable. And I was reading an article by Gary Caton, which I highly recommend if you're interested in going deeper into the Mercury cycles. He's written, and it's about the elemental cycle of 2024 and 25 of Mercury through fire. So he really goes into it in a lot of depth. And it was fascinating. It was a great read. And Shawna caught me. I was updating my notes late last night because I'd seen this article, just having a quick scroll through Substack, as you do before you go to sleep, and came across this article. And it was like, oh, no, I've got to, while I think about this, I've got to add it to my notes. So yeah, I was up late writing about Mercury. He talks about how there's this 6-7 year cycle as Mercury retrogrades through all of the elements. So at the moment, we knew that for 2024, it's all fire, and there's 2 more fire retrogrades to come. But when I looked at them, some of them start in water, which is interesting. They start or end in water, and then we move into a water year. of retrograde cycles. And all of those elements carry their own characteristics, and they hit different houses in our charts for different groups of us. So we may experience them in different ways, but likely to be the same overarching themes, which I found really fascinating. So I've actually made some quick notes, and we will go through what to expect for the different rising signs. So where you're looking at the fire in Sagittarius, Aries, and then Leo, this makes that triangle. And then as it moves backwards into water, you'd be looking at Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer, making that triad, which we'll move into in 2025. In terms of Mercury's journey, we'll see his last visibility. He's currently in evening star, which we can see because he's behind the sun at the moment. And his last visibility will be on the 30th of November. So although he starts retrograding, he'll still be visible for a few days before he then dips below the ecliptic and below the horizon for us, and before he'll re-emerge as a morning star. And what Gary said in this article was that I hadn't thought of is, of course, because Mercury's crossing the ecliptic, Mercury also has its own nodes, its own north node and south node. So we find that Mercury is also meeting its north node here. It's like a conjunction, which would be when we get an eclipse of the sun and the moon, is when they meet the moon's nodes. That causes an eclipse. So in a way, this is Mercury having like a small eclipse. So then you think, okay, well, what was the last time Mercury met the north node? And that was in the retrograde in September. So events in September might have the same theme that then carry forward. So it's like every other retrograde. One would be the north node, one would be the south node, but there would be a similar theme. And north node is like modern astrology would look at what you're moving towards. In Hellenistic, we've been taught it's more of like the hungry ghost of something you just can't satiate yourself. You're moving towards something, but it's never enough of it. Now, how Mercury experiences its north node, I do not know. But I'm now quite fired up to get Gary's book, Lean Into All Things Mercury, and see if I can learn some more about what happens when Mercury meets its node. So I hope you don't mind that I'm sharing it all with you in my excitement of finding this new information. So it'll meet the node on the 1st of December. That's the moment. And I think it was the 4th of September was the previous one. And then it forms an inferior conjunction with the sun. So that's when it makes its Cazimi moment. So that's the smallest, it's been at its shortest elongation rather than its greatest elongation, and an inferior conjunction. So at the moment, we're still seeing Mercury in its psychopomp phase, and it will be emerging into its trickster phase, which I think I've got wrong before, where I've said it's in one or the other. Checking those phases, I'm fairly sure that's where we are now. And this kind of gives some insight into how the as above, so below that we quote so easily came about. And it's because of this Mercury movement across the ecliptic. Obviously, the sun travels in a straight line along it. The moon goes in that line, and then Mercury does also, and goes to those places that other planets just can't reach, like even the moon. That Mercury finds this information and can share it with us. So that's why he can be known as a psychopath. When he's not visible, it's thought of as the underworld then. And so when he's going retrograde, usually for planets, it's like a east-west kind of motion, but for Mercury it's also a north-south, upwards and downwards kind of motion. So it's so wonderfully complex and so hard to get my head around. So I hope I've explained it in a way that makes some sense to you, because it took me a little while to take that in and understand that that's why we get this wondrous looping effect, which Christopher often talks about, like being a stitch, like going back on a stitch, or when you finish the end of something and you do like some extra securing stitches. So I get the sense of this Mercury retrograde as a securing stitch. Okay, we're just looping back. People say in meetings, don't they? Let's return back, or let's loop back to something. So yeah, catch Gary Caton's article. And you can check Gary Caton's article on Substack. It's called The Mercury Elemental Year for 2024 and 2025. Or his book, I've just checked on, still available on Amazon, Hermetica Triptycha, The Mercury Elemental Year. And I imagine that's going to take us even deeper into the joy of this. So I'm going to give a little rundown on what Gary says each of the signs will experience. And like I say, so if you're an Earth sign rising, which is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, and if you're not sure, you can try on AstroSeek or the Chani app, and you can pull your own chart up. If you've got your birth time, you'll be able to find out what rising sign you are. Or you might recognize the themes as we move through them and just instinctively know which one is the theme that you're working on this year. So with earth signs, they're sensitive to the emotional dynamics of life, Gary says. Your sense of familial connection and duty, and your contribution to the following generations. At some point this year, you will probably experience either some strain and or emotional renewal in the bonds of your most intimate circles. And I'm an earth rising, so I will share that I've had family situations, older parents going for operations, my sister not being well. There's been that family strain in terms of how can I help them? What can I do? What's going to be constructive help? They really don't want me to help with astrology. I have found, much as I would love to, and I can see a lot of this in the astrology, that's been some learning for me, is to step back from stepping in with astrology help and find other ways to help them. That's been something I've had to learn this year, so I can definitely see that for myself. For air signs, and here we're looking at Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. So if you're one of those three rising signs, you're likely to be more sensitive to the relationships between people, which will impact you in a more personal and direct way. And at some point this year, it's likely you will face some social challenges. I don't know, do you know anybody who's an air rising that we can connect to?
No.
No.
I'm surrounded by fire risings and earth rising.
That's so funny. Yeah. So hopefully if you are an air rising and you've been experiencing this, please do tell us in the comments, because it's interesting that this is like a theme that there's been 3 retrogrades working on, and then there'll be another 2 in 2025 working on these themes for all of us in those 3 signs. And water sign risings. So here we're looking at Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Water sign risings, Gary says, will be more sensitive to resource issues, which will take on a more personal feeling and dimension. At some point this year, you may find you have less or even more of something you previously thought. This includes intangible resources like patience and kindness and courage, so like personal attributes as well. Do we know anybody, Shawna?
Well, I live most of my days as a Cancer rising. Yeah, I think I mentioned to you earlier, I work in a teaching setting in my regular 9 to 5, and I work with adult students, and most of them, beyond telling me that I'm very much mom vibes, that I have a lot of patience with them. And how much they appreciate it. But on a personal level, the topic of patience has been a primary focus for me, as well as I think a lot of people are feeling the whole budgeting situation. So when you spoke of resources, that's where that seemed to light up for me a little bit too.
Well, I hope you fall on the side of having more of something than you thought. That's our prayer for water risings. And then we move on to fire sign risings. So here we're looking at Leo, Sagittarius, which we focused on a lot this week, and Aries. And the fire sign risings will be more sensitive to your image and how you come across to others. From time to time, it may feel like you need to tweak some things, or you may even feel called to begin to construct an entirely new image rather than updating or improving on the existing one. So do we know any fire sign risings?
I know a lot of fire sign rising. In my everyday life, I work with, siblings with, mother-in-law, and parent of. Yeah, so I have a lot of fire around me. My child in particular is a Leo rising and has been experimenting with their personal aesthetic, so different clothing styles, different hairstyles, things like that. So that I feel is definitely touching home.
So yeah, just to close up with Mercury, as we've said before, it's all the words: review, reflect, revise, rewind, revisit. And we should add, what's that word, like reboot your computer before we get to the actual Mercury date, before we get to the 26th of November, just
restart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need an RE word for that, really, because that's quite often what's most important for me, because quite often when it's going to affect me, then I'll know, because before the retrograde even starts, as Mercury's in shadow, I'll start having problems. Everything gets full. And yeah, I've just had the notification just in time that my iCloud is full. So I had to spend, while you're trying to work, you then have to spend a couple of hours either deleting it or deciding you're going to up your budget to spend more money that you haven't got on cloud software or whatever. So I prefer to go through and spend the time deleting stuff. And I swear every time I'm going to be more organized doing it as I go, but it never happens. You're in a rush. You've got to upload something and you've got a deadline. So you do it and then you move on to the next thing. But then it comes to bite you on the bum when it's full and you've got to go back and spend 2 hours that you haven't got deleting. Deleting things I really don't want to delete as well. But I suppose that's a retrograde theme as well. But I think that's a thing with Earth risings, maybe find that wanting to hoard everything. It's like, I've worked on this, I want to keep it. So deleting it breaks my heart as well. It's not a job I enjoy doing, but it is a necessary job before Mercury retrograde, at least for me. And also to remind people again, not to worry. This happens 3 times a year, 3 weeks that Mercury's retrograde, although it's a lot longer in the shadow. It's in its shadow now up till the time of the retrograde. Be out of the shadow when it gets past the 22 degrees. And that'll be on the 3rd of January. The Sun and Mercury meet in Cazimi on the 14th of December at 14 degrees of Sagittarius. And Gary noted something interesting as well about that Cazimi degree and the retrograde degree. He had a chart which was copyrighted, so I didn't want to take a screenshot and share it. But if you're interested, it's worth looking at how those degrees evolve and how, although we take a notice of the stationary retrograde and the outer shadow degree, actually the conjunction degrees, they matter too. So yeah, it's worth remembering that. 14 degree as well, if it's hitting something in your chart, if you're a fire sign particularly and it's hitting something in your chart, that would be important to check out. Otherwise, it is a great time to test things out. If you're setting something up and you want to find out what the problems are, that is a really good way to use Mercury retrograde if you want to soft launch anything as well. Done that before in a Mercury retrograde, and it's really good because all the problems will immediately become very obvious, and it's a very easy way to deal with them all and know exactly what you're up against. It's a really good way to work with the energy. But I do feel like retrogrades are like nature's way of telling us to slow down, which is hard around this time of year. But sometimes I do think like nature has its own innate patterns, and the direct movement of the planets, we get a boost of energy, we move forward with things, and the retrograde is slow down, lean into it and take a bit of a break. So as well, look after yourself and slow down a little. See if you can take something off of your burden, even if it's just for a couple of weeks. Yeah, can you delete something out and then see if you still want it in your life at the end of the retrograde? That might be another good way to work with it. What are you thinking, Shawna?
Yeah, we're moving into the slower season. So, it's going to be a good time to make sure you're checking off all the boxes. For me, I love it when, it gets cold and I can hibernate. So if I have an excuse to hunker down at home, there's my Cancer rising showing again, right? But if I can hunker down with my stack of books and a nice cozy blanket and my favorite pair of fuzzy socks, I'm great. And we're getting ready to move into that season. And yeah, I think that's a really excellent point that you made, that you're just tying up some loose ends, and the retrogrades usually offer us that opportunity to go back, make sure we've put away the things we need to put away and finished up and, tied up the things that we need to.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And that's the beauty of knowing astrology, isn't it? Just, I often say, like in the coaching, it's just flowing with the energy rather than trying to swim against it. If you're trying to swim against it, it's going to get really tough. But if you're willing to listen to the advice and go with it and make a few tweaks to your life, it gets so much easier. And since knowing astrology, my life has flowed so much more easily because I've just been willing to go with that flow. So no more trying to swim upstream for me.
Don't resist.
Yeah.
Don't resist the current.
Yeah. Quite often it's not the astrology bringing those to us. It's just our own brains or a capitalist society saying, you need to be on that treadmill 24/7. It's like, no, you don't. And actually rest is very important for us. And that's saying that you can't pour from an empty cup. They found quite often with productivity that it doesn't go up once hours go up. So you reach a certain point where actually reducing somebody's hours by 2 hours would actually increase your productivity than it would by increasing it by 10 hours. And that person can be at their desk or at work for 10 hours longer, but they're not going to produce any more at all.
Right.
They're just going to have a less beneficial work-life balance. I did have the note of the shadow. I thought I would. It entered its shadow on the 7th of November when it was at 6 degrees of Sagittarius, and that's where it will station direct on the 15th of December. And then we'll see the morning rise, and its first visibility as a morning star will be on the 11th of December. So that's just some dates if you want to check in your diary. If you look out for Mercury as a morning star, if you're an early bird, Mercury will be there before the sun, which is like a nice way to spot it.
And as of right now, Mercury's still visible, but it's going to be at sunset until after the retrograde, so that you know where to look for that.
Yeah. Right now it's still visible just until the 30th of November. It's still
Yeah.
possible in the evening. And then, as we said, that applying Sun trine Mars is moving into place as the Sun moves further into Sagittarius. It's just got one more degree to go, one more day to go. But this is kind of like the most intense point of it. We were discussing before we started recording about how this might show up. And quite often it's very bold, yang, assertive, brash kind of actions. You know, you think of like the soldier or the bodybuilder kind of archetype when these two meet. And it can lead to aggression on the roads as well. It's a good time to watch out if you're driving. People who have a slightly short fuse can get very hot-headed at that time. You know, no judgments, but it just is a thing, isn't it? Since we've been watching astrology, we know that Sun Mars and seeing accidents on the road or whatever are a thing. Or people texting saying, oh, I had an awful journey because everybody was so aggressive. And it's like, yeah, I know why.
Yeah, I love that that's actually happening on a Tuesday.
Yes. Mars
Hard day, but it's in a trine, so hopefully it's a little more gentle.
Yeah, and when it's in that trine, that's the nature of Jupiter. So it's got something that it can bring us that's beneficial. You know, so whatever that bold pushing forward energy is moving into, it's something that be of benefit for you. So again, it's watching for where that comes and how could you use it in your own life, I suppose. So again, we're looking at the fire signs there. We've got Mars in Leo, the Sun in Sagittarius, and Aries would complete the triad. But equally, as it's the Sun moving into it, we would say it would be the double-bodied signs as well that might feel it. So that's Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo. So they're the signs that might feel that. But we were talking also about the fight that happened just before we started recording, the Tyson and is it Jake Paul, and sort of how that kind of meets the archetype as well, like these two giants of different industries almost, because I think Jake Paul is a YouTuber, a famous one. I mean, I don't follow boxing, but I'm just interested in the astrology of how well timed it was. And Shawna was telling me about Tyson's outfit that I hadn't heard of, but when I went to Google it, all that came up was Jake Paul's outfit and how expensive that was. I was like, so he knows how to put on a show. And then you see that Leo element, Mars in Leo, you know, is this person in this diamond encrusted boxing outfit. And we thought, and meeting in this match that I saw a lot of, and I don't follow people that talk about sports. So when sports intrude onto my timeline, I know there's something going on, I suppose, and I pay a little bit more attention about, okay, where's the astrology in?
Yeah, I thought that was a really great example, especially with the flashy, you know, the costume effect of their gear and their actual attire during the match or leading up to the match. But it was two titans of their own industry coming together, and literally it's that mano a mano, macho, you know, overzealous kind of something to prove, even if it's, I don't know, without a full proving, even without a real point to it, just to draw attention. This feels very attention seeking as far as this aspect goes.
I'm sure all the people who made money from it, you know, given it was big enough to intrude onto my timeline, which is usually all astrology related. I'm sure there probably was a lot of money made. So.
No doubt. But, you know, I mean, besides just being very flashy, confidence, motivation, maybe some different things with leadership, initiation, those kinds of things could definitely come up.
Yeah, it's interesting as well how, like, again, I can only judge by the people on my timeline and their chat, but they definitely thought that Jake Paul was the underdog. And yet he came out on top. And it's interesting how those perceptions and sometimes biases also lent into astrology predictions that are now maybe being revised in a mercurial way. But it's interesting then when you see the Mercury with the Sun, it's like, yeah, you can see that money-making element. Mercury rules merchants and money making and money markets and the exchange and movement, fluidity between borders. So that's a real fluidity between border thing, like somebody who's not a boxer coming into the boxing arena and taking on one of the greats. He's not just coming in and taking on somebody at presumably what should have been his own level. He's like, yeah, let's do a really big fight. Let's grab some headlights here if we're going to do this.
Yeah, bravado for sure. But yeah, definitely Mercury overseeing commerce and trade. Or just exchange in general, right? Not necessarily monetarily, but exchange. Yeah, that was a great example to bring up.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that concludes this week. And next week, we'll be back. And for December, I'm glad to say that we have the other ladies joining us. Ask will be reunited. All the founder members will have Krista from Practical Astrology, Janessa from Bijove Astrology. So they're going to join us, and the four of us will be looking at the astrology of December because it's the winter solstice is Yule. It's an important turning point. So we're gathering together to do this work. So we look forward to seeing you then. And thank you for joining us. Shawna, would you like to remind everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm excited for next week too. It's been a long time since we've gotten to get the whole group together. Our schedules don't often align, so it's really nice. Yeah, so smartastro.com for readings or chit chat or whatever. And you can find me on the socials. Blue Sky has been amazing so far. Still on X, Instagram, Substack. Yeah, same handle for all the places. Thanks for having me, Sonia.
I love having you. I love having our chats together.
Yeah, me too.
Right. So I just hope that everybody watching enjoys it.
Yeah.
Enjoys listening to us. And yeah, if you have enjoyed it, please remember to like and subscribe. And we're always really happy to hear your comments, how you've experienced it, how it's landed for you, if any of the transits are affecting you. We'd love to hear about it. Yeah, do engage wherever you're watching this. So thanks again. Bye-bye.